In the previous section, we just worked to set up a very basic alert controller, which is just displaying a simple message here. We set up both the alert and the action sheet and saw that they were very similar. One just appears kind of in the middle and one appears down at the bottom. So we'll see that these two will actually look a little different once we start adding stuff like text fields and actions to them. But for now, they're relatively the same. So we set them up and then actually show them by calling our present method. So we're going to toy around with this present a little bit by changing our animated and completion parameters, and then we're going to take a look at how to dismiss these alert controllers, so how to get rid of them once they're shown. So first of all, our animated, we saw that when we actually loaded up our alert controller, it kind of zooms in to it, so it starts out big and then becomes smaller. And although that happens pretty quickly, it is definitely animated. So if we set this to false, let's just see how the two differ. So whether we're showing our alert or the action sheet is still going to be animated, the alert is not. So let's see how these two differ. We'll go ahead and run this. Now, the animation itself doesn't take that much processing power, but if your app is already running really slow, you might want to consider not animating your alert controllers. But otherwise, I think it makes for a nice aesthetic, so typically we will set this to be true rather than false. So button 1 is just displaying the alert controller straight away, so note how there was no kind of zoom in or anything like that. So if we were to then compare it to the is animated, so the true, note how this one kind of comes up from the bottom. And if we would set this one to true again, this one kind of zooms in from the side of well, it starts out bigger and then zooms into a smaller size. So we'll just test that, and then yeah, so note that big to small. All right, so that's just the animation there. It just makes it look a little better, but again, takes a tiny bit more processing power. So if things are running slowly, then consider setting that to false. Now, as for the completion handler, well, this is a simple closure, which takes in no parameters, and typically has a void return type. And usually we only use this to perform very simple tasks, if anything. And actually, most of the time, I'll set this to nil anyway. So this completion handler is basically called as soon as our view controller is presented. So once the alert is presented, once it gets popped up, the completion handler is called, so any code we put in here will be executed. So this might be something as simple as printing something out, it might be dismissing another alert controller, and it could be a variety of tasks, but we do want to keep them fairly simple. So the way we'd set this up would be something like this. So it's just a basic closure. If you're not too familiar with closures, we will be using them quite a bit, so definitely either read up on them or watch our tutorials on closures. Otherwise, we'll be keeping our closures fairly simple. So it basically looks like this. We have, oh, and it's doing the automatic thing again. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this blank. So the closure block, it's kind of like a mini function. We put it in between these curly braces. It's going to have no parameters, so we're going to leave this blank. Okay, it's going to have a void return type, so we're going to put the arrow and then void, okay, capital V, important, and then in, and then any functionality we want we can put after this. Okay, so this is pretty standard closure syntax. Any parameters go in here. Return type, in this case void. In is kind of specifying the body of the closure, and then we'd put any code in here. So you can think of it as a mini function. Okay, in this case, maybe all we want to do is print out some message, and that message could say something like, alert is being displayed. Okay, similarly, we could do a very similar thing for our action sheet. It's just perhaps we would want to take this code and just copy it in here. Okay, instead of alerts being displayed, we might want to say something like action sheet is being displayed. So let's just demonstrate those two. And if everything is working fine, if we understand these, then we can move on to how to actually dismiss these alert controllers. Okay, so let's pull up button 1. Alright, so new alert for you, that's fine. And let's see if it printed that stuff out. It definitely did. Alert is being displayed. So basically, as soon as our alert controller is presented, it is calling our completion handler. Okay, similar thing will happen if we call our action sheet. It's just going to print out that the action sheet is being displayed instead. So let's call button 2. That pulls up and it says action sheet is being displayed. Okay, so that's the purpose of the completion handler, is really just to execute any minor tasks that we might want to execute once the alert controller has been presented. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to dismiss our alert controller. Now there's a few different ways we can do this. We can dismiss it on trigger of some other action. We can dismiss it after, let's say, a few second delay or something. Typically we dismiss this based on the actual actions attached to the alert controller. So I think we'll focus on actions in the next section, but basically very often there'll be at least one button attached to an alert controller, and that will be like a dismiss button, which basically once pressed will get rid of the alert controller. It will take care of the dismissing for us. Alternatively, we can call on our alert controller, the name of the controller, dot dismiss, okay, and this is one of the methods that is attached to it. Okay, so if we call on this animated, let's do true again. If we set animated to false, that's just going to get rid of it right away. The animated true kind of fades it out rather than just getting rid of it immediately. Again, saves processing power if it's false, but looks better if it's true. And then again, another completion handler, we could add in extra code that says something like alert is being dismissed or something. Why don't we do that? So let's just copy this in. We'll paste it in there, and alert is being dismissed now. Okay. Might as well do the same thing for our action sheet here. So dismiss animated true completion. Instead of the alert being dismissed, it'll be the action sheet is being dismissed. Okay. So this is a very basic way to do this. It will present the alert controller and immediately dismiss it. So let's just see what that looks like. Now this isn't necessarily ideal because it appears and disappears pretty quickly, so we might not be able to read the message that is being displayed. So if we pull this up, note how it pulled it up and then dismissed it right away. It's being displayed and then dismissed. And the same thing will happen if we go with the action sheet. Okay, it's going to display and dismiss immediately. So let's pull this up. There we go. So not ideal because we can't really read that. If we did want to display this kind of or if we did want to execute this kind of display dismiss behavior, we might want to introduce a bit of a delay. Okay, I mean, ideally we would have that action associated with the alert controller, but we haven't talked about alert actions yet. So let's talk about how to introduce a bit of a delay and then also dismiss the alert controller that way. Okay, now this is going to use some variables and some methods you might not be familiar with, but don't really worry about it. It's more just for the purposes of demonstrating the dismiss action than anything. We're just going to, first of all, create this constant. Let's call this one not display, I actually wanted to call it delay. And it's basically going to be equal to this class dispatch, I don't know why I keep saying display, dispatch time dot now. Okay, as opposed to dot distant future. We want dot now, okay, plus, let's say we want to dismiss this after 3 seconds, okay? So it's basically saying, okay, it's the time now plus 3, and this will be our delay. After this, we want to call dispatch queue, okay, dispatch queue dot main dot, and then we want async after. And now we're going to pass in a deadline and an execution handler. Okay, so the deadline is going to be our dispatch time. It's going to be this delay. Okay, and the execute, unfortunately, doesn't allow for nil. So we're simply going to take in no parameters, and we're just going to return a void in and do nothing. We could print it, that is going to be dispatched if we want, but in this case, I'm fine to leave it blank. So if you, for whatever reason, your completion handlers do not allow you just to enter a nil, then just do something like this. And this is essentially just returning nothing and doing nothing. It's kind of like having a function that is like this, okay, and then calling on do something. It's essentially doing nothing. All right, so let's get rid of that. Get rid of that annoying space. And now instead of dismissing it right away, we're actually going to move this into our execution. So we'll call on our alert controller.dismiss. We'll actually get this out of here, and we'll put this in here. So we'll do self dot and then alert controller.dismiss. Because this is a closure, we have to call on self so that this knows that we're talking about our view controller's alert controller. Okay, so let's give this a save, and let's give this one final run through. So we do pretty much exactly the same thing for our action sheet. I'm not going to bother demonstrating it because I think you guys get the idea, and if you want, you can explore that a little further. So before we press on the button, let's first discuss what's going to happen. So remember, our delay is 3 seconds. Okay, we're basically setting this delay to occur, and so basically whatever code we put in this execute will be executed after this delay. In this case, this is just dismissing our alert controller. So let's go ahead and press button 1, 2, 3, and there we go. So it looks like it dismissed just fine. Okay, so that's one way of doing things. If we know that we want to, if it's just a simple message to display, then we can do that, and that is basically going to auto dismiss that message. Okay, the alternative, and what is in my opinion a better idea, is to have some kind of a button, some kind of an action associated with this alert controller that the user can click on to actually dismiss the alert controller. Okay, so that's what we're going to be focusing on in the next section, is adding actions. We'll start simple with just a dismissive action, and then we can grow in complexity from there.